Hi, I'm Malika Bilal. Today, a presidential shift in the Maldives following Sunday's historic election. So what does new leadership mean for the country? Tweet us your thoughts or leave them in our live YouTube chat, and you too can be in the stream.
For many of us, this has been a difficult journey, a journey that has led to a prison cell or years in exile. It's been a journey that led to a complete politicization and breakdown of public institutions. But it's been a journey that has ended at the ballot box.
On Sunday, Maldives opposition leader Ibrahim Mohamed Solih won the country's presidential election. The stunning defeat of President Abdulla Yameen caught many observers off guard. The country has suffered a difficult transition to democracy since the end of 3 decades of authoritarian rule in 2008. Following his election in 2013, Yameen routinely used his power to crack down on political dissent, jailing rivals and even Supreme Court justices. So what does this win mean for democracy in the Maldives? Here to discuss that in Geneva, Jeffrey Waheed. He's a deputy ambassador to the United Nations representing the Maldives. In Mali, Eva Abdullah, she's a member of the Maldives Democratic Party and also a member of parliament. And in London, Will Jordan, a journalist with Al Jazeera Investigations. His documentary, Stealing Paradise, took an in-depth look at government corruption during Yameen's tenure as president. Welcome back to the stream, all of you. I want to start with our community. Several of them are very excited to show you here via pictures. This is Aya. She says people are overwhelmed by the victory over injustice, the lack of freedom and fairness, and shares a picture of people out in the streets celebrating after the election. Here's another ongoing celebrations. Adam Ting tweets to the stream by the opposition, and you can see them gathered there late at night. Eva, how significant is this win by the opposition candidate, a candidate who is from your own party?
I think as the president-elect said in his victory speech last night, he said this is a historical moment. This is a moment of hope. I think that's exactly how a lot of people are feeling at the moment. It's one of those things that it felt impossible until it was done, but now it feels inevitable. We knew we had the votes. We knew people wanted justice. We knew people wanted democracy back. We knew people wanted their fundamental rights restored. So it's good to see that people voted for the Maldives. It feels like the course has been righted again for the Maldives.
The course has been righted. Jeffrey, your thoughts?
Thanks, Malika. I have to begin by saying, at least I have to offer a warm congratulations to our panelists, Eva, to the Moldovan Democratic Party, to the Jamhuri Party, to the entire opposition coalition for the victory of their candidate in this presidential election. You know, Honorable Ibrahim Solih and Honorable Faisal Nasim won an election that was by all measures free, fair, and credible. This election stands as a testament to the strength of our institutions. And, you know, with 55 days till their inauguration, it's not an easy task to keep that coalition together, to figure out how they're going to create a government in a presidential system. And over these next 50 plus days, the government is going to come together with the opposition to create a transition team that ensures the continuity of government, but also ensures that the services that need to be provided to the people of the Maldives are still provided. Thankfully, they have a very strong foundation to build upon. We have a number of projects that will benefit the people of the Maldives immensely, a number of initiatives that will really put Ibu Solih on the right footing when he does take over as president in November of this year.
Not an easy task. So before we go too much further in the future, I want to pause for a second to remember what happened earlier today on Monday. So ahead of the election, many people were predicting that we might not see a concession speech immediately, but President Abdulla Yameen did concede. You see the headline here, Abdulla Yameen concedes defeat in Maldives presidential election. He gave a televised speech on Monday doing just that. Have a look.
Maldivian people have decided what they want. I have accepted the results from yesterday. Earlier today, I met with Ibrahim Mohamed Solih, who the Maldivian electorate has chosen to be their next president. If I had given in every time I faced an issue, the rights of the people would have been compromised. I worked to uphold the law.
Will, you heard the speech right there. What are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, I don't think President Yameen is particularly worried about the rights of the people. He's been caught out. All of the tricks that he's used over the last 5 years haven't worked. He's been voted out, and democracy is the least worst option. And in this case, it seems to have worked. But Jeffrey talked about the strength of the institutions there. I don't think, despite the fact that we've pulled off an election that does seem to be credible, that the institutions are strong, and that's going to be the big challenge that the Maldives faces from here. First up, the coalition won't be that strong because it's a pretty motley crew of parties, and there's a lot of challenges ahead. Those institutions are pretty weak now.
So two people, Eva, have mentioned the challenges ahead and it not being an easy task. Two people on our panelists, of course. This is Will and Jeffrey, both forecasting that there is a hard road ahead. What do you make of that in terms of what the opposition has as a hurdle?
I think, without a doubt, the task ahead will be difficult. As Will said, we're a band of different political parties with very different backgrounds. But I think our candidate, Ibrahim Mohamed Solih, is well placed to keep the coalition together. He's a solid man, he's a dependable man who's built a reputation around listening to people and pulling people together. He's been at the center of bringing this coalition together and also keeping it together for the past year and a half. Our key moment, I think, was fielding a common candidate, which took the government by surprise and which the government really couldn't come back from. And I hope we stay committed to governance.
The government has always wanted a common candidate, Eva. You know this very well. We've always asked for a common candidate to be put forward, one who could actually run in the election instead of one who's been convicted.
It's really not up to the government to ask for the opposition's candidate. It's really the
job
opposition's
of responsible government. A responsible government should put a candidate that can actually run in an election.
Democracy is all but obsolete in this country at the moment. We have no functioning independent commissions. We have no functioning constitutional commissions working. The media needs to build the Human Rights Commission, the Broadcasting Commission, all the independent commissions. We need to work from ground zero. We need to work with these institutions. The Parliament, as you know, since last year has been under military siege. So we need to build those institutions up.
The Parliament is not under military siege.
When was the last time you were there?
Unlike you, I'm not a member of Parliament.
Well, I am a member of Parliament, and I'm not allowed inside the Parliament without the military's permission. I'm not allowed inside the chambers without the military's permission.
Without the Speaker's permission, according to the rules and guidelines of your very Parliament.
According to the rules, it should be.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're seeing
it's still the military there.
Jeffrey and Eva, I hear what you're saying. Eva, finish up your sentence there because I see Will kind of nodding his head, wanting to get in there. Eva, go ahead.
The soldiers have taken off their uniforms. They're in plain clothes now, but they still control the entire parliament. They guard the entire parliament. 12 members of parliament, opposition members, have been unconstitutionally barred from entering the parliament. Even me, I've not been. I still hold my seat.
12 members who
but
were
I can't
bribed
get into the,
to cross party lines.
I can't get into
bribery is not a place. There's no place for bribery in a democratic governing system.
So as part of what Eva is saying there is allegations of bribery, there were allegations of corruption, but also allegations that President Yameen jailed his political opponents. And so Will, give us some context here for that dispute.
Well, I mean, it depends how far you want to go back. But to talk about democracy in the Maldives, to an outsider, that sounds like something that has existed. There's not really been a fully functioning democracy in the Maldives. There was a 30-year dictatorship under Maldives Abdulla Yameen, who is now in the opposition coalition. There was a complicated transition. There was some time under Mohamed Nasheed, but he didn't have the time or the space, or some of his partners the inclination to build that. And now we've had this term of Abdulla Yameen's, where there's been an assault on many, many institutions and individuals and the media within that country. And so we need to go right back to the start. Building those democratic institutions is going to take a lot of work, and we're not in a place where we can just say, okay, there's a change of government now, just get going again with the democracy. That has not been built, and it needs to be.
Well, to illustrate that point, you mentioned Mohamed Nasheed, that is the country's first democratically elected president. He tweeted in. He writes, "Congratulations to President-elect. You've done an extremely good service to not only to the people of the Maldives, but also to freedom-loving people everywhere. Democracy is a historical inevitability." And so, of course, this tweet circulated. It's got about nearly 5,000 likes. But he is in exile, and he's not the only one. We actually heard from a fellow Al Jazeera journalist. Her name is Zahina Rashid, who is also in exile in Sri Lanka right now. And here's what she tells the stream about how she's feeling.
So the opposition's victory means that a lot of people living in exile can go home now. So here in Colombo alone, there's more than a dozen people and their families who've been out of the country for several years. I've been speaking to some of them here, and there's a lot of joy about the possibility of returning home, but many of them say they're not taking chances until there's a smooth transition of power. For me personally, I've been outside of the Maldives for more than 2 years now, and I'm really looking forward to seeing my family, especially my niece, who is 1 year old and who I haven't met yet.
Jeffrey, what do you make of that comment? There are several the number really is not countable, but there are people who are in exile. We've heard from some of them. What do you make of that?
The number is not countable because a lot of the time these exiles are self-imposed. There's no charges against a lot of these people. There's no reason why they can't come home. And I would like to
these people have been under constant threat. They've had death threats. They've had their businesses attacked. The threat of jail.
Not by the government, by a hostile political environment that you are a part of. One of the biggest problems over the last 10 years has been that we have seen the very worst that our nation has to offer in terms of political discourse that's laced with hatred and bigotry.
That has allowed gangs and criminals to rule the country, and with utter impunity.
Gangs and criminals do not rule the country. There's no
but they've certainly been very complicit.
More than another.
Please do not belittle the threats that these people have received.
I'm not belittling the threat that they face. I'm saying where does that threat come from?
You just implied that they're under self-imposed exile because this is what they fancy at the moment.
No,
they didn't want to leave their families. They didn't want to leave this country. They didn't want
for their exile. Listen
to Zahina. She has not seen her new niece. She has not met her niece. I can't wait
and I have a lot of love for Zahina, but my point is that the problem here is the fact that politics in the Maldives is virulent and hateful and bigotry. That's the problem.
Where she worked, she had to leave the country.
I want to jump in here because I want to make sure that our audience is hearing what you've said. And of course, Zahina is a former stream guest, and so she's described some of the threats she's had against her previously. But as you're saying, she had a machete thrown at her. There were death threats. And Jeffrey, I hear what you're saying, that you're saying it's the political climate. It's not necessarily coming from the president's office. But Will, you also can't go back to the Maldives. Is that correct?
Well, no, in my case, I wouldn't say I can't. I'd say I probably shouldn't, because I don't think it would end up well for me. But the suggestion that there's a self-imposed exile for people like Zahina, for people like Niaz Ibrahim, the auditor who began the process of exposing so much of the corruption, is just laughable. I mean, these people have been under huge threat. Journalists have gone missing. As you said, there was a machete lodged in the door of one of those journalistic outfits, and all sorts of attacks and
these
plotted
incidents are all
attacks.
condemned by the government. There are police investigations into those.
Yeah, but
into those
forces in
intimidation
support
attempts.
of the government are plotting a lot
Like
of those.
the
And
police
what is
investigation
clear
into
is
the
that there
disappearance of
is
Rilwan,
cooperation.
like the police investigation into the murder of Yamin Rashid. Do you know what's happened to those police investigations? Those families are still awaiting justice. The people with all the suspects were let free. What kind of police investigation are you talking about, Jeffrey?
Before Jeffrey answers that, I want to share this tweet from the president-elect who pledged to open investigations into two of the people that we are talking about here. This was during the campaign. I pledged to open investigations into journalist Ahmed Rilwan's disappearance, Yameen Rashid's murder, repeal the Anti-Defamation Act, and ensure press freedom. Jeffrey?
The Anti-Defamation Act, first of all, ensures that there is some measure of democratic responsibility to go along with democratic rights. One of the biggest problems that we have in the Maldives is that there is no true adherence to truth. Instead, there's deference to hyperbole time and time again. And it doesn't, and they don't try to maintain any semblance of honesty in what they're reporting. And that is a problem. That is something that needs to be addressed. But that doesn't mean...
Did you just seriously defend the Defamation Act? You really have no need to act like this anymore. Yamin really is really no more. You really don't need to defend the Defamation Act.
Yeah, I've advocated
you really
the
don't
Defamation
need to
Act
defend
ever since my
Yamin's
partner
every
used to
single
get
autocratic
weekly
move.
rape threats, monthly death threats.
This
is not
only
acceptable. You've been on the end of these threats as well.
And
all because
so Eva and Jeffrey, I'm going to pull you apart for a moment because I want to bring in this comment live via YouTube. Talent writes in, what is the assurance that this transition will uphold freedom for the people and not power to the elected government? This is a theme of this conversation because I've heard it from some of you already today. Will, what's your answer to that?
Well, I think actually certainly what it is going to uphold is some semblance of freedom because Yameen is not in power anymore and he is not systematically taking away those freedoms. The challenge now is how do you build a coalition that can in turn build a functioning government? How does that coalition work? You know, we need the parliamentary elections to certainly work out the share of power in terms of seats. And then after that, we need to work out who is going to have which ministries, how there's going to be a division among those parties, and to start actually building the capacity in those institutions, which doesn't exist at the moment. And to talk about some of those things Jeffrey is talking about, you have a defamation law which criminalizes much journalism, actually, that needs to be fixed. You have many other laws that need to be improved,
fixed in a way that still encourages fair and balanced coverage.
That need to be rebuilt. Of course, we need fair and balanced coverage, but that's not what the defamation law has been written or enforced.
The defamation law stops slander and libel, which is rampant and has been rampant in the Maldives. You know, people make up stories that have no basis in reality, and that comes from our politics. The problem is that politicians feel like the only way to mobilize their bases, to galvanize their support, is to resort to more and more extreme rhetoric. And it's rhetoric of polarization, which is really debilitating our country, debilitating the Maldives. After 10 years of this kind of language, of this kind of virulent anger and hate, politicians in Maldives do need to take more ownership to promote peace. To promote peace in our country. And that's something that doesn't happen, especially from some of the more activist MPs.
How do you explain the state media acting like President Yameen's own PR machine, not facing any consequences of their absolute and open political bias, but any TV stations or any newspapers that are not aligned to the government are faced with threats, their journalists are jailed, their journalists are threatened, they are fined with exorbitant sums. How do you explain that? How do you explain? I mean, the managing director
a lot of the explanation comes in the fact that a lot of stories...
Jeffrey, let's let Eva finish that sentence. Go ahead.
The managing director of the board of the state media was the MC for President Yameen's last rally of the campaign. How do you explain that?
Jeffrey?
I'm not going to explain what party positions people might have had, but what I am going to say is that people do need to report based off of fact and based off of reality.
Okay, so we heard the question from Eva and we got an answer from Jeffrey. I want to bring in our community for what they are looking forward to under this new president, the president-elect. So here are two comments from people of what they want the government to focus on. This is Saipad who writes in, we're hoping that it will mean a return of our fundamental rights as granted in the Constitution. The fear of being arbitrarily detained would not be the norm, that he will work on cleaning up the judiciary and law enforcement. We're sorely in need of a system overhaul. So that's one person's opinion. Another person writes in, this is what they are looking forward to in the next administration: healthcare, affordable and accessible, improving our living conditions, livable wages. We can't afford to keep destroying our environment, and he wants honesty and transparency. Eva, how doable are these lists of things in this next administration, in your perspective?
I think absolutely doable. I think over the last 5 years, what was lacking, over the last 7 years, in fact, what was lacking was the political will and the commitment to not govern, to not afford people the public services they need. Instead, we saw all our state resources wasted on corruption.
There's no evidence of that.
Incompetent, and through
we have an anti-corruption commission, we have a state asset recovery commission, and over the next administration, we are going to see all of this corruption brought to any corruption
Ibrahim
that might be
Mohamed
there
Solih
brought to light.
has a record of serving as a member of parliament as a committed Democrat for the past 25 years. And I think he's proven himself to be, like I said, a dependable person, a Democrat committed to democracy. So I think, and he's pledged throughout his campaign, he pledged openness, he pledged transparency, he pledged fairness, and also a number of other pledges: housing, education, health. And I think, as he has also repeatedly said, and as we can see, I mean, the Maldives has one of the highest GDP per capita in the entire region. We're close to 9,000 GDP per capita. So therefore, we do have the money. We just need to have a zero tolerance on corruption, and we need to put this money into education, into health, into housing, into the environment, and to building our institutions.
And some of that will have to come with money, the funds, making sure that the country has the funds to do it. Which brings me to this point that several people have raised on YouTube. Creative says, what do you think about the future of Chinese investment in the Maldives? Another person writes in, will the Maldives have more military ties with China or India? Two of the countries really closely watching these elections. On that China angle, China has given investment into the country. This is a comment we got from Nishwan Abbas. He's a civil society activist, and here's what he thinks.
Maldives has been promised more than $1.1 billion in loan aid by China. We know the country has only spent less than a quarter of this amount. We also know that this money has not been spent wisely, not all of it. A lot of it has actually gone to corruption. So the incoming president needs to make sure every penny of this money is accounted for. He also needs to make sure that he averts the debt trap of China. We know that China is already enslaving other countries, and we know what happened in Sri Lanka. We know what happened to the Hambantota airport. We don't want the same things happening in the Maldives.
So, Will, some strong words there. We know that the Chinese government has been a supporter of President Yameen. How do you see this support moving forward under a new president?
Well, I think Yameen used China as a sort of nation of last resort because he knew he wasn't going to get any support from the Europeans or from the Indians. Now, in terms of the great game, we probably will see India step forward, Saudi Arabia and China step back, and probably the Europeans and the West in general, the Americans being more engaged with this new coalition government.
The geopolitical forces we will continue to keep an eye on. Unfortunately, we're out of time for this part of the conversation. Thank you to our guests and, of course, to our community. And until next time, we will see you online.